Thank you all. um, yes, it was. Anyway, I came to Tassajara in '69 on my way to Japan, thinking that I was going to go to Japan and study carpentry because I had been a union carpenter in the Bay Area for some years, and I felt that I wasn't learning anything. I wanted to learn more. And I'd grown up in a very radical Berkeley family, but I had become a self-styled Taoist, not knowing what a Taoist did or was or anything, but I liked the idea of it anyway. And I was working as a carpenter and had a big vegetable garden in the backyard, and cut all my own firewood and made a lot of my own. I was very independent, shall we say, even though I was living in the heart of Berkeley. And I got this idea to go to Japan, but I'd never been out of the country. I didn't know any Japanese language, didn't know any Japanese people. Anyway, I was sort of a little hesitant to go, and I knew about Tassajara through friends that were involved in Zen Center. I went down there planning to spend 4 days and ended up spending 4 years. And in that time, I met Suzuki Roshi right off, and I realized I could learn something from this man. So I stayed and became a very devoted student of his. But I was never the academic or literary type like Peter, for example, who was a college professor even before he came there, I think. Anyway, but I knew how to build things and fix things and make things work. So I was instrumental in setting up the original format of how Tassajara works. I built the kitchen there, and anyway, I did a lot of physical construction there, and was part of the so-called Rokuchiji, the management group there for the years I was there. So I was very deeply embedded into Tassajara, and then Suzuki Roshi came to me and asked me, how could I be of greater service to humanity by being a priest or by being a carpenter? And I said, I kind of like both of them. I don't know. And that was a real dilemma for me. And I sat with him for quite a while. And I went to him, and I said, a priest. And he said, he didn't say yes, no, good, bad, or anything. He said, And later he told me to go to his wife, Oksan, to be measured, but he didn't say for what. And then later it turns out he was having robes made in Japan for me. And he was going to ordain me. He didn't even ask me about it. I mean, there was no talk about it. He just announced it. Anyway, the robes came, and Reb and I were ordained together, and I had married my girlfriend that I'd shown up with down there, and we'd had a baby shortly after that. And so I was sort of settling into Tassajara, thinking that was the future. And then in a public meeting, he announced, without talking to me first, he said, you may think I'm crazy, but I'm sending Paul to Japan to study carpentry. So that was the first I'd heard of it. And 2 or 3 months later, I was on a boat with my family going to Japan. Anyway, so that was a little turnaround there, and one that I took very much to heart as being a teaching situation. You could have whatever you want. You could have whatever you want as long as you don't want it. Anyway, it's which ties into the subject that I want to talk about today is the Genjo Koan. Jane has been talking to you about the Genjo Koan the last several weeks, and as a very wonderful approach towards it. I was very pleased to hear. Enjoyed hearing her approach, but she's very organized about it. She apparently writes it out and reads it. So that's not my style. I can barely read. I'm quite dyslexic. Reading is not easy for me. And all those years I was in Zen Center, no one ever put any of my writing in the wind bell. I was never appeared in the wind bell. I maybe a couple of pictures of me once or twice, but I was never in the wind bell. Anyway, and my Dharma brother Reb is very much an academic and very much a scholar, and we would always fight about whether the words or action, which came first, words or action. I was in the action camp, he was in the word camp. And recently in the last few years, I've realized now that I've retired from construction, and I've realized that you need both. That it's not an either or thing; it's a both thing. And I've been studying with him and studying with Taigen in Chicago. And anyway, so I've been putting a lot more energy into talking about Buddhism, studying Buddhism, and thinking about Buddhism. And so, and I actually wrote a book some years ago, maybe 8 years ago now, about Zen and architecture, Zen and carpentry. And I did it by writing it out in longhand and then having somebody that knew how to. She was a translator of French and Italian into English, and she could somehow read my scribble and put it into sensible English. So with her help, I wrote a book, and the book is really all about the Genjo Koan and how it applies to design. So that's what I want to talk about today, talk about the Genjo Koan in terms of design. It's the same process. Anyway, the Genjo Koan is an amazing piece of writing. It's as it says, it's the fundamental point is actualizing the Buddhist teachings in a very small print. And it starts out by echoing the Heart Sutra about the form and emptiness and not things. There's no realization, no Buddhas, no sentient beings, no birth and death. But Buddha's way is basically leaping clear of the many and the one. So that's our quest, is how to leap clear of the many and the one. And how do we do that? We do that by the next paragraph, which is where is it? As or the fourth, actually. The study of Buddhism is the study of the self. So that's the beginning point. So what does that mean in the terms of design? The study of the self. Well, what is the self when you're designing something? The self is your location. The self is where the sun comes up. The self is whether it rains or not. The self is whether it's a level site or a sloping site. In terms of you're thinking of in terms of a house, you need to know. You need to study the environment that you're building in. What it is that you're actually dealing with. Is it in the city, in the country? Is it shady? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it wet? Is it dry? All of those kind of things. Just like we need to think about who it is. Are we tall? Are we skinny? Are we addicted? Are we unaddicted? Do we have what kind of personality foibles do we have? Who are we really? To settle the self on the self is, as Katagiri would say, to settle the self on the self is the first thing that you need to do, to find out who you are and to own it. Just like AA says, everybody starts them saying, "Yes, I am my name. I'm an alcoholic." Well, you need to say that about yourself. Yes, I am your name, and then all your traits, that who you are, all your karmic traits that you have, that you've been born with, and that have influenced your life, and it makes you who you are, makes you the self that you think you are. So the same thing is true with the building project, say, is you need to find out all those things that you think you are, the location, the social environment, all the sort of things that have led up to be earthquakes, or landslides, all the karmic events, all that affect that piece of earth and that piece of sky and that piece of scenery. So then once you're clear on what that is, then you can look about the other things that are happening on the site, such as what is it going to be used for? Who's going to live there? How much money do you have to do it? What is the culture of the environment? What is all of these different traits that are going to influence the actual structure, and that's just like when we live our life. We have all these different things that impinge on us. We have, significant others. We have our family. We have our education. We have our political, economic situation. We have all these different forces acting on us, and we have to, and we need to learn from them, we need to learn from them and not be caught by who we think we are. And there's often this sort of confusion about the self and the ego. People think that you have to get rid of your ego, but it's not. I don't see it that way. I see it as you need to identify your ego and then not be attached to it. Turn it loose. But you have to have a firm grip of yourself. But then you have to turn it loose. That was a great advice. As I was going to Japan, Katagiri Roshi stopped me in the upper garden at Tassajara, and we were up there by ourselves. He's in the middle of the garden. He planted his feet apart, and he raised his fists to the arm, and he said, "Keep a firm grip on the void." So you must have a clear view. You must have a clear view of who you are, but you also must be done. You also have to drop all attachment to it. So and realize that it's good to change, and even though it changes, we still call it a self. Just like we know the birth and death are empty, but we still call them birth and death. Anyway, out of the Heart Sutra. So then you need to be informed. You need to drop away any ideas you have about the site, and just let the site inform you. Let the site inform you of what it is that it wants to be. And if you gather all that information about who's living there and how much money they have and what the time frame is and what the weather's like, and all that, the building more or less designs itself. It all becomes very clear without having to philosophize about it or strategize about it or come up with theories about it. All the information you need is there. So that's being actualized by the myriad things. So when you're actualized by the myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the body and minds of the others, drop away. No trace of realization remains. So hopefully that if you do this completely, you let the environment explain what it is that it wants to be, then you have a building that has no trace. Unfortunately, buildings are fixed in time. They don't change. They don't change as rapidly as the human mind can change, or as the weather can change. But they are allowed to change in Asian construction, anyway. In Japanese construction, they are allowed to change. It's changing is part of the elegance of the building. Aging is considered a plus. And many buildings are considered the most beautiful just before they fall down. Moss growing on the roof and and the wood, the weathered wood. And anyway, it's a design principle that allows for change, where much of Western construction, especially modern construction, is all based on trying to keep change out and have it look brand new constantly, and not worry about weather, or not worried about any of the extraneous environments, but to just have hard cleanable surfaces that don't change readily, that don't be hard affected by weather or time, and don't age gracefully. So you get modern structures that are all streaked with rust and rain and dirt, because they don't have any way of dealing with the weather. Anyway, so those are the principles that I've used in my architecture, and that's basically what I wrote the book about. It. I just go through there and explain what it was, when we came to this situation, what did we have to work with, and then what factors influenced it, and then how did they resolve themselves, into what form did they resolve themselves. It's not always easy, because you're dealing with people, and people don't always know who they are. Often, in most cases, people don't know who they are, and they pretend to be somebody that they're not. And if you build a house for that person, they're going to be disappointed. So coaxing out the true intentions, the innermost desire, the true intention of the people that are going to live in the house is a very important, or the people that are going to use the object, whatever, if you're designing a frying pan, you have all the same concerns. But knowing your end client is also part of the trick, and probably the most difficult one, because people are not so readily, don't give up who they are so easily, which mostly comes down to, they want a cheap house, and then when you get it half built, they say, "Oh, that looks too cheap. I want an expensive house," and they start gilding the lily. They start putting gold trim on the cardboard box, which is a little unfortunate, but it's still all part of the game. When I was in Japan, I lived mostly in the Kyoto area, and there was no Soto Zen in the Rinzai. In that part of Kyoto, was all Rinzai. Kyoto was almost all Rinzai Zen, and even though I was there under the Suzuki family's tutelage, they were in the other half. They were in northern Japan. They were in Shizuoka, which was between Nagoya and Tokyo, and they were too far away to be. They were too far away to be of any help to me as far as my visa, and my credentials to stay in Japan, where I was there under a student visa, and I was always very afraid to say that I was actually working. Although my first job, I earned 30 cents a day. That was my wages for my first job. But anyways, I needed to find a sponsor, and I was introduced to a man at Daitokuchi, very close to where I was staying when I first went there. Anyway, that's at the Gintaku Shita, which is just north of Daitokuchi, and the teacher there was Nanrei Kabori. He was in a famous temple, National Treasure Temple, with a famous name, Kabori, and he spoke English. He learned English as a written language. He wasn't really very good at conversational language, but he knew it as a written language very well, and he spoke it as a written language. And because he spoke English, he was given the duty of being the teacher for Westerners at Daitokuchi, where there had been some tradition with Ruth Fuller Sasaki, and anyway, there had been a tradition of Westerners studying at Daitokuchi after the war. But he didn't like Westerners at all. He was very anti-Westerners, but it was his duty, so he did it anyway. And his teaching was one, to study just one, just to study one. And I sat for many years actually with one. But he would lecture on Sunday, which I would go to in English. And I remember one of the things that impressed me most was he was saying that Westerners wanted all these questions on who, how, where, why, what, and when. And that really the only important question in all of that was how. How was the only important question. And then you practice how until the how disappeared and you only had the two left, how to do it. And so that fits in with this design process. You have to study the how of it and then just do it. Anyway, that's the main thing I have to talk about today. I'd be happy to talk about any questions or anything that you would like to ask me about it. I'd be happy to talk about.
Okay. Anybody? Yeah, Mark?
Where's Mark?
Mike.
Oh.
Mark's working. Your speaker is off. There you go.
I wanted to thank you for your talk because I was an architectural student. And that was what I took into account when I designed something. I didn't realize I was doing Zen, where I sat there and let the environment describe how to create a design and stuff. And something I said a long time ago is you can't always choose your teachers. And I didn't, in drafting and designing and structures and stuff like that, I hate to say this term, but you become one with the entire project. It kind of creates itself. Like you say, you look at a landscape and you say, okay, I want to put a structure here. How do I not impact the landscape, but become a part of it and stuff? And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it kind of gives me that feeling that when I was studying architecture, that was the important part, was you didn't push yourself onto an environment. You let the environment tell you how to accomplish what you're doing. And so, does that make sense?
Yes, that's very good. That's very good. But you have to always be careful of the little presumptions that you have and ideas that you carry into it, like what is good and what is bad about that building. That so much of architecture comes with a pre-designed idea or a pre-designed idea about what it should and shouldn't do, independent of whether that's what's required of the situation. So we always have to be on guard for all these little kind of ideas that we have that we want to invest into the project, even though they don't really belong there. So it's like our life. We have these little delusions about things that we'd like to carry through into our daily activities, and they color and limit and shepherd what we can actually do in the world. But yes, that's exactly the point.
It's like the Tao was telling me, if you're going to put something here, you do it this way. And it's not a challenge or anything. You want to flow with the environment. And I get the impression from your talk that that's kind of like with, the Shogo Genzo and stuff, is that you're made up of your environment. The myriad things create who we are. And when you're designing something or painting something or whatever, you let the myriad things direct the way you do it, and you'll accomplish what you're doing. If you fight it and say, I'm going to do it my way, it's going to be done this way, you won't succeed. And
Exactly.
I just never heard Zen described amongst architecture. I'd like to read your book because I spent several years as an architectural student, but my handwriting was so bad I went into mechanical design because I could just print instead of doing fancy scripts. So thank you very much for your talk.
Certainly.
Joanne?
Yeah, I relate to this just because my first career was in graphic design. And so if I were designing a logo, for example, it's basically a visual that encapsulates everything about the person or the business, who they are, but also what they aspire to. And so I would do extensive background research and questions to figure out, like, you know, to get to know what was under the surface. But I have a question. I'm wondering, Paul, how are you a carpenter as a Zen priest? And how are you a Zen priest as a carpenter?
Okay, that's a very good question. And it's not and it's always been a question. It's always been a question for me too. When I was, when I was at Tassajara, it was easy. It was easy to just, to understand. We worked 6 hours a day, and we meditated 6 hours a day, and we studied and ate and washed up another 6 hours a day, and then we slept 6 hours a day. So it was integrated into our everyday life and our everyday practice. And then later, when I came back from Japan, and I went back to Tassajara, and then again at Green Gulch, and it was the same integration. And then later at Green Gulch, I started a carpentry practice, a carpentry group there. There's about 12 people. I had like 12 students, and some of them were experienced craftsmen, and some of them were total beginners. Beginners were better than the experienced people because they had so much to unlearn. And then the teaching would all be about, you could deal with every little activity. Do they do this? Do they do this with full intention, or do they add something to it, or why do they miss the mark here, or why are they taking so long to do something that, where's their mind? There's countless opportunities to discuss practice when you're working as a craft. And since we were Zen students there, we were getting $50 a month and we've been bored. Time and money had nothing to do with each other, so that I could work with people on a level of what they were actually doing, not whether or not it made financial success. So under those circumstances, the Zen teaching and the Zen priest and the Zen and the carpenter worked very, very well together. That was very easy to do under that environment. And then there was a change of leadership at Zen Center, and the building program stopped, and I took on the new student program at Green Gulch, and we would meditate, and then in the morning, and then we would wash the dishes and cut firewood and do all the sort of chore things that a community needed, and then I'd sit again in the evening, and then we would talk about what it was we were doing. So there again, there was an opportunity for people to actually have physical experience with the world, and then reflect on what it was they were doing. And then I had, when I left Zen Center in '89, I had this sort of naive idea that I could do both at the same time. I could have a building practice and a retreat practice, and I would alternate, and because I led groups in Japan uh, before, and found it very gratifying to do like a 1 week, or not in a 1 month retreat in Japan at Rinso-In, where we would have like a modified Tassajara schedule at the Zendo there at Suzuki Roshi's temple, and then we took a week and sort of ran around and played in Japan, and then came home. So I had this idea that I could do retreat practice and woodworking practice, but once I had woodworking practice, it ran away with me. You had to rent on a shop space, and you had insurance policies, you had clients, you had employees, you had responsibilities. That's, you can't turn it on and off like a faucet. So it ran away with me, and not until just maybe 5 years ago or so that I stopped doing all that, and now I'm back to having a less different kind of demanding schedule. But yes, it was very difficult. And when you're in business, you can't have people. If somebody doesn't do it right, you can't have people do it over again and do it until they get it right, because you're paying them to do it, and you can't say, "Well, I'm not going to pay you for that." You have to do it over again. You can't do that in this world. So you have to figure out how to use people at the level in which they exist. It's not so easy to teach. You have to teach by a much more remote, more abstract way. And I pushed the idea in my construction practice that process. I had the motto on the wall: process is our product. So it's how we do things is important, not what we do. But not everybody participated in so deeply in that, but some people did. Some people did. Anyway, I think almost everybody got something out of it. And I would open the morning every morning with chanting, offering incense, chanting, and then I would just chant, not the group, because there'd be, there are a lot of Hispanic Catholics and people from all over, with all different walks of life as employees. And I would offer incense to an altar and chant usually a Kwanzaa, and then I would talk about what we were doing that day and why we were doing it and what it was about and so forth. So that was the extent of my being able to teach in a commercial situation. It was not as rewarding as I would have liked it to have been, and I had to make a lot of compromises along the way. And it's you're dealing with human beings that didn't necessarily sign on to be Zen students, so you have to give them a fair amount of space. That answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And just one thing that occurs to me is, in design, which is a craft as opposed to art, you're always interpreting something outside yourself, right? It's not like if I'm an artist, I'm expressing myself, but when you design a building that is for somebody who's going to live in it, you have to see something in them, right, to express whatever it is that represents them. And yeah, like as far what you just said about not everybody's a Zen student. Like sometimes you can do a design and it gets rejected by the client, and you may know that it's something that would maybe represent like their aspirations better, but
Yep.
at the same time, you meet them where they are, and they may like a different solution than what
Yep.
you would
They'd be very fond of the diluted vision of themselves. They don't want to see their true self in your response. That's very true. Yes, you have to. It's not and I've always made that distinction between craft and art. And I was actually kind of down on art because it seemed so subjectively driven by a encumbered view of self. But then I married a woman that was in the art world, and I spent a lot more time with artists and looked at a lot more art. And I realized the value that art has, the value that art has is that it makes you see things differently. It makes you see, and it awakens the way-seeking mind. And
It
in
evokes
Buddhism,
response.
in Buddhism, that's the most important thing you can do, is awaken the way-seeking mind, in my view of things. So so that's the great value of art, I think.
Thank you.
Rachel?
Thank you very much for your talk. I was a manager for a design firm, and the money part. So I was in the intersection of client and different artists and different contractors, and then the artist who owned the firm. It was rare, but it happened. Did you ever have the experience where, by being in the middle of money and art and aspirational inspirations, that the client found out who they were, and it was different than who they thought they were to start with? And it was the process of creating that which was so important to them. I mean, it happened rarely, but there was that change, and sometimes it was really remarkable, the one or two times it happened. I wondered if you ever had that happen where.
Yes, sometimes that's happened. It's a very, Suzuki Roshi was very good at that. He would wait for the right moment to tell us that we were doing something wrong. He wouldn't just come out and say, "No, you're not doing it right. You should do it this way." He would say, he would wait for the right moment to say, "Well, maybe it's better if you try it this way." So finding that skill to do that, how to let people fall into a deeper understanding of it is a very important skill that is not easy. It's not easy to learn, but and I'm not especially good at it, but I've been struggling with that and trying to do that all my life.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Mike? And John?
Real quick, I disagree in a sense. I think that art and craft sometimes are the same thing. Because if you're designing a building or something, it's an art that instead of you look at, you interact with it. Instead of perceiving it, you use it. And that was one of the things that I loved about, like, your altar that you created for Jane and Peter. Is it's a beautiful piece of work, and it's wood and stuff, but it's art as much as craft. You put it together a certain way, and that's the craft, but what it represents and how it shows itself is art. And I think sometimes art and craft are the same thing. And I know we're getting into technical terms here, so I'll stop there, but I think they both interact with each other.
Yeah, there's definitely a semantic question there, and I'm using it, and I'm separating. It's true that the two cannot be fully separated, but I'm separating them only as a way of seeing them more clearly. That one is responding to the environment, and the other one is responding to a spiritual, emotional need. Anyway, if the artist makes something that is appropriate for you, you're not going to learn anything. But if you make something that's inappropriate for you, you're going to say, "What's this? How did I get this piece? Where's it for?" Then you have to think about who you are and think about what the nature of existence is in a deeper way. So that's why I make that distinction between the two. But yes, the two blend together. But so much of craft now has been taken over by art. So you have all these glass blowers that make these glasses that make objects that you can't actually use, but they're pretty to look at. And so craft, that craft has been a sort of a dirty word. There's a school here in the Bay Area, the California College of Arts and Crafts. It's over 100 years old. Well, about 10 years ago, they dropped the craft out of it because the president at the time thought it sounded silly, and he didn't want to be involved with a college that had craft in the name. But I always said that I was taking the craft from San Francisco and bringing it to Oakland and hanging on to it until they realized they needed it and take it back again. But anyway, it's a an old, long going debate.
John?
Thank you for taking my question. Um,
John?
You've had such extensive experience practicing both in community settings and on your own. I was wondering if you could give some observations with regards to that, and I don't know, maybe compares and contrasts or whatever you feel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the important word is practice. You need to have a practice, and it should and the practice could be, a lot of different things. It could be a community can set a practice, but also a sick child could be a practice, or an ailing spouse, or a variety of things that you need to attend to, whether you really want to or not. It's something else. It's something that draws you out of yourself and into a realm where we're picking and choosing is not such an important object. Anyway, so I think that as long as I think it's important to have a practice of some kind, whether you're in a community or not. I think that's the most important point. And then it just to keep in mind that they keep in mind the teaching, the basic teachings of Buddhism, and look about how they relate to your everyday activity.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Right now, for example, we're faced with global warming, and there's all these people want to do this, they want to do that, and I did put out a certain amount of money and built a windmill to make electricity in a place where I was living. Unfortunately, the windmill didn't work, but anyway, and that's a large problem with a lot of these things, even like solar panels, they only last so long. And anyway, but as a single individual, you can only do so much to turn the tide of global warming. But the one thing that I think that you can do, and is important, is not to waste anything, and not to buy things that you're going to throw away. So if you buy something, you need to have a use for it. You can't just throw it away. Now, that's impossible to do, of course, but that's my practice, is to use everything, not throw anything away, not to waste. Anyway, I have a garden, and I have chickens. The chickens are a great recycler of virtually anything, and I try not to buy things that are plastic or things that I don't need, or things that are going to break and need to be thrown away soon. But that's my sort of personal practice, my personal relationship to the environment. But I think it's good for everybody to have some kind of a practice that they do. The Sudoku used to have us, when we were in the city there, used to have us pick up all the trash on the street as if we dropped it ourselves, or to go down to the corner and cross with a light rather than jaywalking across the street, because the housing was all across the street from the temple. All those kind of things make your practice come alive, make your Buddha mind come alive.
Chris?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So quick thought, and then a sort of a question. You were talking about the glass blowers who are making beautiful things to look at that you can't actually use. And since you are an architect, the first thought that popped into my head was that building that Frank Lloyd Wright designed in Chicago, where it's just really, really beautiful ceiling, and it looked like it was glowing, but when it rained, it leaked really, really badly. And again, I think it's sort of a continuum. or maybe not a continuum, where the more towards craft you get, the farther from art you get. I don't think it necessarily works like that, but I do see your point that they can be separated intellectually or cerebrally or whatever. Um, but the question I had sort of was, I'd heard the term priestcraft, and I was wondering what your thoughts are regarding Zen practice in terms of forms, ceremonies, etc., and also generally what a Buddhist practice, what aspects of Buddhist practice, or maybe the ways in which Buddhist practice or Zen study has craft nature or art nature.
Well, priestcraft, you know, pertains to temple life, basically, to ringing bells and reciting sutras and all the life of the temple, um, and it also flows over into, you know, dealing with the sangha, dealing with the larger community and administering to the larger community. That's what I think of as priestcraft. So that's which is a very important and it's a very important part of keeping Buddhism alive and keeping Buddhism it makes Buddhism visible in the world. There's places I would say there was no Soto Zen in Kyoto when I was there, but actually there was Antaiji up the hill above where I was, where what was the name of the priest there, Peter? I forget.
Uchiyama.
Uchiyama, that's right, yeah. And he did not believe in any of that. They didn't chant, they didn't do any of that. They just sat. That was all about sitting. It was just sit, sit, sit. And I tried to go up there, and sometimes I'd go up there and they'd all be sleeping. Or one time I went up, it was not that far away, just up the hill. They didn't have a schedule. There was no way for me to plug into it. I couldn't. And one time I went up there, all the doors were laying out in the yard, everything. They'd had a big beer party the night before and just tore the place apart. Anyway, it was anyway there. And he was a great teacher, and one of his students is now in Indianapolis, Shohaku Okamura, who I think is probably the best Zen teacher, or at least the most attractive Zen teacher in America today. But it was not touchable. It was great. It was powerful for the students, for the disciples that were there, but there was no way to interface with the rest of the world. At least I didn't figure out how to do it. But very, very powerful teaching, wonderful book that he wrote, and a wonderful philosophy, a wonderful way of presenting things, and he had some very wonderful students, but not something that you can contact with the rest of the world.
Was Antaiji where David Chadwick went when he wrote the book Thank You and Okay?
No, Antaiji was gone by the time he got to Japan. That was somewhere else.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Paul has this note, don't waste stuff, and Paul had an agreement. He ought to explain it, but anyway, my understanding is he had agreement with his shop is in Oakland, and he had an agreement with any time a tree was cut down in Oakland, he was told about it and he could go and claim the tree. Is that right, Paul?
Well, that's it's a little more complicated than that, but yeah, I took trees that were cut down by the city or cut down by tree trimmers, and sawed them and made lumber and then made things out of them. Yeah, I used there's some incredibly beautiful wood that grows in the city that nobody wants, that ends up going to landfill, and and they're the modern, the last 20 years or so, they've come up with a technology with these thin curved machine-made blades. So that always the big problem with things that grow in the city is that people interact with them and they nail things on them and they bury. Anyway, you find all kinds of things inside of trees that grow around it. So you're always in danger of dulling your tools on the metal that's inside the tree. And if you have very expensive blades, it becomes economically unfeasible. But these cheaper blades that can be sharpened, anyway, it made it possible to cut up. And now many people are doing it. It's quite a lot of people are doing it now. But back when I first started doing it, it was considered quite strange.
Yeah. So our altar is made from that wood, Paul, isn't it?
Yeah, all the wood I worked with is salvaged like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was though. I don't know whether your wood is it poured over cedar? I don't remember what your altar is.
I've
now.
forgotten also. Although one of them is part of it is yellow Alaskan yellow something or Canadian.
Alaskan yellow cedar, yeah, that could be, yeah.
Yeah, there were two types of wood in it anyway, apparently, but I've forgotten what they are too. But they have beautiful.
Anyway, there are many beautiful, especially here in California. There's many beautiful. I forget you folks are in California too. There's many beautiful trees. I mean, trees can grow here. A wide variety of trees from all over the world can grow here, and so we have this wonderful variety of beautiful trees that are. And the wood is gorgeous, and it's not free because it takes a lot of labor to turn it into lumber, but it is available.
Okay, everybody. Today we're going to have. Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah.
Yep,
thank
you're
you.
welcome.
Thank you, Paul.